Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to continue learning about typography. The last video I did on typography was on an individual letter and the anatomy of that letter. But today we're going to focus on groups of letters together or words, okay? Not necessarily words, it could be initials or something like that, but we're going to talk about letters together. And in particular, we're going to talk about the space between the letters and the difference between kerning and tracking and how that pertains to graphic design.
Okay, so adjusting the space between the letter is called kerning. It's something you do as a graphic designer to make your word look more pleasing. Kerning is the adjustment of the space between two letters. So why would a graphic designer want to do this? You'd want to do this to deal with the funkiness that comes out of just typing a word. As you can see here, the word truth just typed on the left, and you can see the awkward spaces between the R and the U and the T. Nothing looks even. So kerning it will actually make it just look more pleasing. We'll make the space look even throughout each letter. Now, it's not exactly even because letters have different attributes. You see the T has this big overhanging part on the top, right? The R also has a part that sticks out where the stem is very much on the left side. And so that creates different spacing issues, but we want to make them look like it's even spaced. So here's some examples of AWE typed. You can see on the top there's no kerning, and the A and the W look very far apart compared to the W and the E. They look like they're almost touching, but because of the way the A is slanted, right, slanted downwards, and then the W is slanted the opposite way, it creates this huge space there even when the tips of those two letters are almost lined up with each other. Okay, so here's some automatic kerning right below that, and that's done in the computer with Adobe Illustrator, and it's often called optical kerning. And then you can see the A, W, and E on the bottom adjusted manually. Big difference between the bottom two, not a whole lot, but you can get a bit more nuanced if you do it yourself. So one way to approach kerning is to approach it in chunks of 3. So you would look at the K and the E, and you would kind of work on that space and try and make it even with the E and the R. And then the next set of letters, you would go with the E, the R, and the N, and you would look at the E and the space between the E and the R, and then you would try and even out the R and the N, and so on and so forth, all right? That way, attacking a whole long word doesn't seem too overwhelming. Another way to look at it is to look at the word upside down and forcing you to kind of look more at the shapes the letters create and the negative space between them rather than reading the word. Another approach to kerning. Okay, so tracking is another way of adjusting the space between the letters, but that's doing an overall group of letters like a paragraph or like a sentence. So tracking would be taking this paragraph or group of sentences here and selecting them all and adjusting them either positively or negatively. So you can make the letters tighter or you can make them spaced further apart, and this could depend on a few things, or why you would want to do this depends on a few things. You might want to make it look more open so it feels easier to read, or you might just want to squeeze a word in, or make it so that it ends in a nicer way, or doesn't go over to the next page or further. You might just need to adjust the space or take up more space. So kerning can be tight or can be loose. Not one is necessarily right or wrong, it just depends on the look you're going for. It could also be called wide kerning, and same thing as loose kerning. So here's an example of some tight kerning where everything looks pretty close together, pretty evenly spaced, and yeah, just pretty close. They're actually kind of on top of each other. If you look at the F and the E and the D, they're kind of overlapping slightly, and the E and the X are just touching, but that's intentionally, obviously, to make the arrow shape in the middle of the E and the X. So in order to keep it looking normal, you're going to have to, the Fed is also going to have to be tight just so the E and X can kind of work. Okay, here's an example of the tightest kerning you can possibly have when you have letters clearly overlapping each other, not just touching, not a little bit, but clearly overlapping. And here's some wider kerning. So look at the buffalo, and it's pretty loose, and there's a lot of space between there, and this still has to be done intentionally and looked at and made sure that everything feels even if it's spaced out like this. Okay, now we got even wider spaced or looser spaced kerning here, and yeah, lots of space between there. It gives it quite a different feel to a logo, to a design, when you have that much space in it. All right, let's now look at some mistakes or some things we can possibly improve on, and some that we definitely need to improve on. Okay, so here is an example of a logo that might need a little bit of kerning done, a little more kerning. I'm sure they did kern it, but if you look at the P and the A, you can see they feel differently spaced than the A and the N. The A and the N feel further apart than the P and the A. The reason is because that P has that bowl or that round area that kind of sticks out to the right side, where it goes into the space of the created by the A slant, where the N doesn't have that, so it just feels further. Where else could this use it? If I look at the D and the O and the R, the D, because it's rounded and it has the round part closest to the O, it feels a little further. It feels like there's more space there than the O and the R, because the R has that flush right, I'm sorry, the flush stem on the left that just kind of makes a straight line. It feels closer. And then again, you got the R and the A that feel far apart. Okay, here's another example of some not so good kerning. So as you kind of look at this, you can kind of see some issues. On diesel, you can kind of see on the S and the E looks pretty far apart. Might be intentional with this design, but either way, it's not looking too good. The O and the N, a little far apart. The L and the Y on only look very tight compared to all the other letters, especially the O and the N. The T and the H look close together on closer together than the H and the E for sure. And then the worst offender in this is the brave down there. Wow, okay. The R and the A it looks like two separate words, a burr and an av, right? And then that E is just hanging out by itself. Now again, I don't know if this was done intentionally, but either way, it's pretty bad kerning. Here is a sign from an airport, and you can see how far away the Y is feeling from that O. All right, look at that N and the I here. Pretty far apart. Pretty atrocious here. The sa and the ving look like two separate words. That A and the V should be much closer together. All right, here we go. Even Heinz messed up here. Pourable, mustard, right? The T and the A look too far apart. And again, a lot of times the issues come from the letter shapes, right? So the A has the slant, right? The slant, and then the T has that overhanging, top straight line, which creates a lot of space underneath it. Okay, so why would you want to do kerning as opposed to tracking? Kerning, you'd want to do for something like a logo, something that's very important, where you're going to have this one word or a couple words that are going to be featured and they're going to be seen prominently or a lot. You'd want to kern things like that, or a title of a book or a movie title, or anything where we're featuring some words or some text or like that, right? Tracking you'd want to do for more paragraphs or sentences. When you have these longer group of letters, the letters are going to be smaller generally than something like a title or something like a logo, where we don't really need to get in that tight and see how each letter is relating to each other, but we kind of want to look at the whole and see the space created by the text. All right, hopefully that helps. Hopefully you learned a little bit about typography and about kerning and tracking, and I'll see you on the next video.